A billionaire leaves a $5 tip on a $24 bill. Most waitresses would be angry, most would complain. But Maya Johnson, she sat down across from him, slid that money back, and said something that made a man worth $14 billion cry for the first time in decades. 3 months later, he was dead, and his family discovered that everything was going to the waitress from exit 47. The question is, what did she say that night that changed everything? Stay until the end, because this story will change how you see people forever. The mahogany doors of the law office swung open, and 17 people sat frozen in leather chairs worth more than most people's annual salaries. The air was thick with the smell of old money, expensive perfume, and something else, desperation. Lawyer Harrison Mitchell adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat, holding a document that would shatter lives in the next 60 seconds. Before I read the final will and testament of Richard Allen Blackwood, valued at $14.7 billion, I must inform you that Mr. Blackwood left specific instructions. He wanted me to play this video first. A screen descended from the ceiling. The faces around the room shifted. Richard's son, Gregory, who had already mentally spent $3 billion on a yacht collection, his daughter, Priscilla, who had her eye on the Manhattan penthouse, nephews, cousins, board members, all of them waiting like vultures who had finally spotted a carcass. The screen flickered to life, and there sat Richard Blackwood himself, recorded 3 days before his death at age 78. His eyes, still sharp as broken glass, stared directly into the camera. "Hello, family. Hello, dear friends." His voice dripped with something that sounded almost like amusement. "I'm sure you're all devastated by my passing. I can practically smell the grief from here. Or is that the scent of fresh champagne you've been saving for this occasion?" Gregory shifted uncomfortably. Priscilla's jaw tightened. "For 60 years, I built an empire. I created jobs for 200,000 people across 12 countries. I shook hands with presidents and dined with kings. And in all that time, I learned one absolute truth about human nature. Money reveals who people really are. It doesn't corrupt them, it simply removes the mask." Richard leaned forward in the video, his eyes seeming to pierce through the screen. "So, I spent my final year conducting a little experiment. I wanted to know if there was anyone left in this world who was worth inheriting everything I built, anyone who would prove that humanity hadn't completely rotted from the inside out." He paused, and a smile crept across his weathered face. "I found her in the last place I expected, a 24-hour diner off exit 47, right between a pawn shop and a laundromat. Her name is Maya Johnson. She's a waitress, and what she said to me over a $5 tip changed everything I believed about people." The room erupted. Gregory shot to his feet. This is insanity! He was clearly not in his right mind. But Richard's image continued, unhearing, unfeeling. "Harrison will now read the full terms, but I wanted you all to see my face when I tell you this. Maya Johnson will receive 92% of my estate. The rest of you will get exactly what you deserve, which is exactly what you gave me when you thought I had nothing left to offer." The screen went black, and that's when Priscilla Blackwood screamed. But to understand how a waitress from a roadside diner ended up inheriting nearly $14 billion, we need to go back 11 months. Back to the night Richard Blackwood made a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in that room, and one woman who had no idea she was about to become the most talked about person in America. It began with a funeral, but not just any funeral. The funeral of the only person Richard Blackwood had ever truly loved. Eleanor Blackwood was buried on a Tuesday. The sky was gray and unforgiving, which Richard found appropriate. 73 years old, she had fought cancer with the same quiet dignity she had brought to everything in her life. At her bedside, holding her hand in those final moments, Richard had made her a promise. "Find them," Eleanor had whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Find the people worth believing in. I know you've lost faith, Richard. I've watched it happen over the years. Promise me you won't die bitter. Promise me you'll look for the good." He had promised. A husband does not refuse his dying wife her final wish. But in the weeks that followed the funeral, Richard found himself more convinced than ever that humanity had nothing left to offer. His children swooped in like birds of prey before Eleanor's grave had even settled. Gregory arrived 3 days after the funeral with a proposal for Richard to sign over controlling interest in Blackwood Industries for tax purposes. Priscilla showed up with her third husband, a personal trainer half her age, and casually mentioned that Eleanor had promised her the family estate in Connecticut. Neither of them mentioned their mother, neither asked how Richard was doing, neither seemed to notice that the man who had built everything they would inherit was slowly dying inside. The board members were no better. Within a month of Eleanor's death, 4 separate executives approached Richard with buyout offers, restructuring plans, and thinly veiled suggestions that perhaps it was time for him to step back and enjoy retirement. What they meant was, "Die faster, old man, so we can pick the bones clean." Richard began to take long drives. At 78, his doctors told him he shouldn't be behind the wheel, but he had fired 3 doctors in the past year and hired ones who understood that his money could buy their silence. He would drive for hours through the night, through small towns and forgotten highways, pulling into gas stations and diners where no one knew his name or his net worth. It was during one of these drives, at 2:17 in the morning, that Richard Blackwood pulled into Rosie's Roadside Diner. The parking lot was nearly empty. A pickup truck, a sedan with a dented bumper, and a motorcycle that looked like it had seen better decades. The neon sign flickered, missing 2 letters, so it read RSIES, ROADSDNER. The windows were steamed with warmth, and through them Richard could see a handful of customers scattered at booths and counter stools. He killed the engine of his Mercedes, a car that cost more than the diner building itself, and sat in the darkness for a moment. He was dressed down, plain wool coat, simple slacks, a cap pulled low. Over the years, Richard had learned that wealth was a costume, and sometimes the greatest luxury was being able to take it off. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The smell hit him immediately. Coffee, grease, something sweet baking in the back. It was the smell of 1,000 diners he had eaten at as a young man, before the money, before the empire, when he was just a kid from Delaware with a dream and $12 in his pocket. "Sit anywhere you like, honey. Be right with you." The voice came from behind the counter. Richard looked up and saw her for the first time. Maya Johnson was 34 years old, though she looked older in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform, a pale blue dress with white trim, had clearly been washed many times. There were circles under her eyes, the kind that came from too many nights without enough sleep. But there was something in the way she moved, quick and purposeful, that caught Richard's attention. He chose a booth in the corner, facing the door. Old habits from his years in business. Always know who's coming and going. Maya appeared at his table within a minute, a coffee pot in one hand and a menu tucked under her arm. Up close, Richard could see details he had missed: a small scar above her left eyebrow, the faint calluses on her hands, and eyes that were warm brown but carried something heavy behind them. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured without spilling a drop, which Richard noted. Steadiness under pressure. A small thing, but telling. "Know what you want or need a minute?" "What do you recommend?" Maya paused, tilting her head slightly as she considered him. "Depends. You looking for comfort or adventure?" Richard felt something flicker in his chest. Surprise. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him as though he were just a regular person. "What's the difference?" "Comfort is the meatloaf. It's not fancy, but it'll make you feel like someone's grandma's looking out for you. Adventure is the breakfast burrito. Luis back there, she nodded toward the kitchen, he makes them himself, and he's got a heavy hand with the jalapenos. Either way, you won't regret it. I'll take the meatloaf. Maya smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. Comfort it is, coming right up. She disappeared toward the kitchen, and Richard found himself watching her go. There was nothing romantic in his observation. At 78, with Eleanor barely cold in the ground, such thoughts were far from his mind. But there was curiosity. Something about this woman didn't fit. He had built an empire by reading people, and Maya Johnson was presenting him with text he couldn't quite parse. He watched her interact with other customers. There was an elderly man at the counter nursing a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. Maya refilled it without being asked and slid a small plate with a slice of pie toward him. "Leo, you're going to eat something or I'm calling your daughter." The old man grumbled but picked up his fork. There was a young couple in a booth near the window, clearly in the middle of an argument. The woman was crying silently, and the man looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. When Maya brought their check, she leaned down and said something Richard couldn't hear. The crying woman looked up at her, startled, then managed a small laugh. The tension broke. And there was a trucker at the end of the counter, a giant of a man with tattoos crawling up his neck. When his food arrived, Maya had added extra bacon, and when he pulled out his wallet, she shook her head. "Your money's no good on Wednesdays, Carl, you know that." "Maya, you can't keep—" "I can, and I will. Now eat your breakfast and tell me about that grandbaby." The trucker's weathered face softened into something almost boyish as he pulled out his phone to show pictures. Richard's meatloaf arrived, and it was exactly as Maya had promised, comfort on a plate. He ate slowly, watching, listening, thinking about what Eleanor had said. Find the people worth believing in. When he was finished, Maya cleared his plate and refilled his coffee one more time. "Can I get you anything else? We've got fresh cherry pie if you're interested." "Just the check." Maya nodded and disappeared behind the counter. Richard watched as she totaled his bill on an old register that looked like it predated computers. She returned with a small paper receipt. No rush. And hey, she paused, something flickering across her face. "You doing okay? I don't mean to pry, but you've got that look." "What look is that?" "Like you're carrying something heavy and you've forgotten you don't have to carry it alone." Richard stared at her. In all his years, with all his wealth and power and influence, he could count on one hand the number of people who had ever looked at him and seen something other than a dollar sign, and most of them were dead. "I lost someone recently," he heard himself say. Maya nodded, no pity in her eyes, just understanding. "I'm sorry. The missing doesn't go away, but it does change shape. Becomes something you can hold instead of something that holds you." She paused. "Take your time with the check. I'll be around if you need anything." She walked away, leaving Richard with a cold coffee and a warmth he hadn't expected. The bill came to $18.47. Richard reached into his wallet. He had cash. He always carried cash, and his fingers touched the crisp edge of several $100 bills. But he hesitated. This was the moment. This was where Richard Blackwood decided to conduct his first test. He pulled out a 20 and a 5, $25 total, a tip of $6.53, respectable for a normal customer, but hardly generous. He wanted to see what she would do. He placed the money on the table, stood, and waited near the door, pretending to button his coat. Maya came to clear the table. She picked up the money, glanced at it, and then, to Richard's surprise, simply smiled to herself and pocketed the bills without comment. No disappointment, no complaint, no forced gratitude, just acceptance. Richard left the diner that night with more questions than answers. As he drove home through the darkness, Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Find them. Find the people worth believing in. He had found something. He wasn't sure what yet, but he knew he would be going back. 3 days later, Richard returned to Rosie's roadside diner. This time, he arrived at 11 in the morning, wanting to see the place and Maya in a different light. The breakfast rush had ended, and the lunch crowd hadn't yet arrived. Maya was there, moving between tables, her movements still carrying that purposeful efficiency he had noticed before. When she saw him enter, recognition flickered in her eyes. "Meatloaf was that good, huh?" "Best I've had in years." She showed him to a booth, the same one he had chosen before. "Coffee?" "Please." This time, Richard paid more attention to the details of the diner itself. The decor was dated but clean. The booths were worn but well-maintained. On the wall behind the counter, there was a corkboard covered with photographs. Families, truckers, regular customers, all of them smiling for the camera. In several photos, Richard spotted Maya, looking younger, standing beside an older woman who must have been the Rosie of the establishment. "Who's that?" Richard asked when Maya returned with his coffee. She followed his gaze to the photos. "That's Rosie. She owned this place for 42 years. Passed away about 3 years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that. Were you close?" Something passed across Maya's face. Grief, yes, but also something deeper. Love. Genuine love. Love. Genuine love. "She saved my life," Maya said simply. "Gave me a job when no one else would. Let me sleep in the back room when I had nowhere else to go. Taught me that the only thing worth doing in this world is taking care of people." She said it without drama, without self-pity, just stating facts. "So you stayed, even after she was gone?" "Where else would I go? This place, these people, this is home. Besides, someone has to make sure Leo eats his vegetables and Carl doesn't work himself to death on those cross-country hauls." "You don't own the diner?" Maya laughed, a short burst of genuine amusement. "Own it? Honey, I can barely afford the apartment above the pawn shop next door. No, the diner's owned by some corporation now. They bought it when Rosie passed. Her nephew sold it, didn't even blink. The company keeps it running because the highway brings in enough business to turn a profit, but they don't care about the people, not like Rosie did." She paused, realizing she had shared more than she usually would with the customer. "Sorry, you didn't come here for my life story. What can I get you?" Richard ordered the breakfast burrito this time. Adventure, as Maya had called it. When it arrived, it was exactly as advertised. A tortilla stuffed with eggs, cheese, peppers, and enough jalapenos to make his eyes water. But it was delicious. As he ate, he watched Maya handle a situation that would have broken most people. A man came into the diner, rough-looking, clearly intoxicated even at 11 in the morning, wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in days. He stumbled to a booth and began demanding service, his voice loud and aggressive. The few other customers shifted uncomfortably. The cook, Luis, the one Maya had mentioned, appeared at the kitchen window, his expression wary. But Maya approached the man without hesitation. "Hey there, Marcus. It's been a while." The drunk man looked up at her, his eyes struggling to focus. Maya, I need food. I'm hungry." "I know you are, but you also know the rules. You can't come in here like this. You're scaring the other customers." "I'm not scary. I just want—" "I know." Maya's voice was firm but kind. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to go outside and sit on the bench by the door. I'm going to bring you some food and some coffee, and we're going to talk about getting you to the shelter again, okay?" "They won't take me back. I messed up, Maya. I messed up bad." "I know, but that's what messing up is for, so we can learn to do better. Now come on, up you go." She helped the man to his feet with a gentleness that seemed impossible given his state. She guided him outside without a single harsh word, without calling the police, without treating him as less than human. Through the window, Richard watched her settle him on a bench and wrap her own cardigan around his shoulders. She was gone for nearly 15 minutes. When she returned, she caught Richard watching. "Sorry about that. That's Marcus. He's been going through a rough time since his wife left. Sometimes he falls off the wagon." "You know him?" "He used to be a regular, back when he had a job and a home. Now he's just—" She shrugged. "He's still a regular, just a different kind." Richard said nothing. But something was shifting inside him, a tectonic movement so subtle he wouldn't recognize it for what it was until much later. Before he left that day, Richard asked Maya a question. What would you do if you had money, real money, more than you could ever spend? Maya paused in the middle of wiping down his table. She seemed to consider the question seriously, not dismissing it as hypothetical nonsense. I'd buy this diner, she said finally. Keep it exactly the way Rosie had it. Keep the prices low enough that people like Leo and Marcus could always afford a meal. Maybe fix the sign so it actually spells out the name right. She laughed at herself. It's not exactly world-changing, I know. What about yourself? What would you want for yourself? Maya's expression shifted, becoming something more guarded. I'd want my son to stop worrying. That's the only thing I really want. Richard's eyebrows rose. You have a son? Daniel. He's 11. Smartest kid you've ever met. And I'm not just saying that because I'm his mom. He wants to be an engineer when he grows up. Keeps building these little machines out of junky finds. But he worries about money, even though I try to hide it from him. He knows we're barely getting by, and no kid should have to carry that. She caught herself again, embarrassed by how much she was sharing. Anyway, you enjoy your burrito? Best I've ever had. Richard left a $25 tip that day. He wanted to leave more, so much more, but something held him back. He wasn't ready yet. He was still gathering information, still building a picture. But the picture was becoming clearer with every visit. Over the next 3 months, Richard Blackwood became a regular at Rosie's roadside diner. He came 2 or 3 times a week, always sitting in the same booth, always ordering something different from the menu, always watching, always learning. He learned that Maya worked double shifts 4 days a week because one of the other waitresses had quit and the corporation that owned the diner was too cheap to hire a replacement. He learned that her son, Daniel, had been diagnosed with a heart condition that would require surgery that Maya couldn't afford, not even close. She was drowning in medical debt, working herself to exhaustion, and still falling further behind every month. He learned that despite all of this, Maya never stopped showing up, never stopped treating every customer like they mattered, never stopped going outside to check on Marcus, or slipping extra food to Leo, or remembering that Mrs. Patterson at table 3 always wanted extra butter with her toast. He learned that she had grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home until she aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and $73 to her name. He learned that she had been homeless for 2 years before Rosie found her sleeping behind the dumpster and offered her a job. He learned that she had never known her father and that her mother had died of an overdose when Maya was 7. He learned all of this not because Maya told him, she rarely talked about herself, but because he hired a private investigator, a team of them actually, the best in the business. And what they found only deepened the mystery. Maya Johnson had every reason to be bitter, every reason to hate the world that had treated her so badly, every reason to take shortcuts, to steal, to lie, to give up. But she hadn't. Not once. In 17 years of working at the diner, she had never stolen a penny. She had never badmouthed a customer, no matter how badly they treated her. She had fostered 3 dogs and found them homes. She had spent her Saturdays volunteering at the homeless shelter, where she herself had once stayed. And when her 11-year-old son had asked her why they couldn't have nice things like other families, she had sat him down and explained that nice things weren't what made people happy. Kindness made people happy. Love made people happy. Taking care of each other made people happy. The investigators had found this out because Daniel's teacher had shared the story at a parent-teacher conference, marveling at what an unusual child he was. Richard Blackwood sat in his mansion, surrounded by billions of dollars worth of art and furniture and meaningless possessions, and he wept. He wept for Maya, who had nothing and gave everything. He wept for himself, who had everything and had given nothing. And he wept for Eleanor, who had known all along that people like Maya existed and had made him promise to find them. He had found one. Now came the test, the final test. Richard had to be sure, absolutely sure, because what he was planning to do would shock the world, infuriate his family, and go down in history as either the greatest act of generosity ever committed by a billionaire or the most insane. He needed to know that Maya Johnson was real, that she wasn't performing kindness for an audience, that she wasn't playing some long game he couldn't see. He needed to know who she truly was. So Richard designed a test that would reveal everything. He arrived at the diner on a Thursday night. The place was busier than usual. Some kind of high school football game had let out, and teenagers flooded the booths and counter, loud and demanding, and treating the staff like servants. Maya handled it with her usual grace, though Richard could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She was running on fumes. He waited until the rush had passed, until the diner was nearly empty again, until it was just him and Leo at the counter, and Maya collapsing into a booth for a rare break. Then he called her over. "I think I'm ready for my check." Maya nodded, pulling herself to her feet with visible effort. She totaled his bill, a modest dinner, nothing expensive, and brought it to his table. $23.82. Richard reached into his pocket. But this time, instead of the wad of cash he usually carried, he pulled out a single bill. A 5. He placed it on top of the check and pushed it toward Maya. "Keep the change." Maya looked down at the $5 bill, at the check that totaled $23.82. A $5 bill didn't even cover the bill, let alone a tip. Richard watched her face. Watched for the anger, the disappointment, the crack in the facade. But Maya just stood there, looking at the money. And then she did something Richard hadn't expected. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a sarcastic laugh, a genuine laugh, as though something had genuinely amused her. "Rough week?" she asked. Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm asking if you had a rough week, because anyone who pays a $24 bill with a 5 and seems to think that's enough, either they're having a really bad week or they're testing me." She tilted her head. "And you don't seem like the type who can't do math." Richard said nothing. His heart was pounding. Maya sat down across from him in the booth. She put the $5 bill back on the table between them. "I've seen you watching me," she said. "For months now. At first I thought maybe you were just lonely. A lot of people who come here are lonely. They're not just looking for food, they're looking for a place to exist. And that's fine. That's what diners are for." She leaned forward. "But you're not just lonely. You're looking for something. I've seen it in your eyes. Every time I help someone, every time I handle a difficult customer, you're taking notes, like I'm some kind of test subject." Richard found his voice. "And if I am? Then I guess this," Maya tapped the $5 bill, "is the final exam." The diner was silent. Somewhere in the back, Louis was washing dishes. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. Maya Johnson looked at Richard Blackwood. Though she didn't know his name, didn't know his net worth, didn't know that he held her entire future in her wrinkled hands, and she told him the truth. "Here's the thing about tips," she said. "People think tips are about money. They're not. Tips are about respect. When someone leaves a good tip, they're saying, 'I see you. I see the work you do. I appreciate it.'" She paused. "But respect isn't transactional. I don't treat people well because they're going to tip me. I treat people well because that's who I am. Because Rosie taught me that every person who walks through that door is carrying something. Grief, joy, fear, hope. And my job isn't just to bring them food. It's to remind them that they matter, that someone sees them, that for the 15 minutes or the 2 hours they're sitting in this diner, they're not invisible." She pushed the $5 bill back toward Richard. "So here's your money back. I don't want it. Not because it's not enough, although, sir, for the record, it's definitely not enough, a small smile, but because you didn't give it to me as a tip. You gave it as a test, and I don't accept payment for proving who I am. She stood up. Your meal is on me tonight. Call it professional curiosity. I want to see if you come back now that you know I'm not performing for points. She walked away, leaving Richard alone with a $5 bill and a mind that was racing faster than it had in years. He sat there for a long time, long enough for Leo to finish his coffee and shuffle out into the night, long enough for Luis to finish the dishes and disappear into the back, long enough for the open sign in the window to flicker off. Maya came back to wipe down the tables, not asking him to leave, not rushing him out. "Can I ask you something?" Richard finally said. "You can ask. Why? Why do all of this? Why kill yourself working double shifts at a diner that doesn't even belong to you, for customers who half the time don't even say thank you, when you have a son at home who needs surgery that costs more than you'll make in a decade?" Maya stopped wiping. "How do you know about Daniel?" Richard hesitated. This was the moment of truth. "Because I know a lot of things about you, Maya Johnson. I know about the foster homes and the years on the street. I know about Rosie and what she meant to you. I know about Marcus and Leo and Mrs. Patterson with her extra butter. I know about Daniel's heart condition and the medical bills you're hiding in your sock drawer because you can't bear to look at them." Maya's face had gone pale. Her hand gripped the cleaning rag so tightly her knuckles went white. "Who are you?" "My name is Richard Blackwood." He saw the recognition hit, watched her eyes widen as she placed the name, one of the most famous names in American business, the founder of Blackwood Industries, a man whose face had graced the covers of Forbes and Time and the Wall Street Journal more times than he could count. I don't understand." "My wife died 9 months ago. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the best person I ever knew. Before she passed, she made me promise to find the people worth believing in, people who proved that humanity hadn't lost its way completely. I've spent the last year looking." He stood, facing her across the empty diner. "I found you, Maya, in a roadside diner off exit 47, serving meatloaf and checking on homeless men, and refusing to let an 11-year-old believe that money is what makes people happy. I found you." Maya shook her head, backing away. I'm not special. I'm just a waitress. I just do my job." "No, you do so much more than your job. Your job is to take orders and bring food. What you do is treat every single person who walks through that door like they matter, like they're human. You do it when no one's watching. You do it when you're exhausted. You do it when every single thing in your life is falling apart." Richard reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is a check for Daniel's surgery, the full amount, plus enough to cover any follow-up care he might need for the next decade." Maya stared at the envelope like it was a grenade. "I can't take that." "Yes, you can, because it's not charity, it's not a tip, it's a thank you for proving my wife right, for proving that people like you exist." "Mr. Blackwood." Richard, Maya's voice cracked. You don't even know me. Not really. You've watched me work, but that's not the same as knowing someone. I'm not a saint. I've made mistakes. I've yelled at my son when I should have listened. I've ignored phone calls from people who needed me because I was too tired to care. I'm just a person trying to get through each day without falling apart." Richard nodded slowly. "I know. That's exactly why I'm doing this." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "You're not a saint, Maya. Saints are boring. They're perfect and untouchable, and they make the rest of us feel like failures. But you're human. You struggle and you fail and you get back up anyway. That's what makes you remarkable. Not perfection. Perseverance." Maya was crying now, tears streaming down her face, still holding the envelope like she didn't know whether to throw it back at him or clutch it to her chest. "There's one more thing," Richard said, "and this is the part I need you to understand. Are you listening?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I'm dying. Cancer. The doctors give me somewhere between 6 months and a year.
I've already started putting my affairs in order, and that includes my will." Maya's crying intensified. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. That's the point. You treated me exactly the same way you treated everyone else, because that's who you are." Richard paused. "Maya, I want to leave you something, not just money for Daniel's surgery, something more, something that will change your life." "I don't want." "I know you don't want it. That's exactly why you should have it." Richard moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. "I'm going to come back here, Maya, every week until I can't anymore. I want to get to know you, the real you, not the person I've been observing from a distance. I want to hear your story, your fears, your dreams. I want to know what you do with the kind of resources most people only fantasize about. Not because I'm testing you anymore, but because I'm tired of being alone with my money. I want to spend my last months with someone who reminds me that the world is worth saving." He opened the door. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. "And Maya, spend that money on Daniel's surgery. Don't be too proud to save your son's life." He left. Maya stood alone in the empty diner, holding an envelope that contained more money than she had earned in 10 years combined. And for the first time since Rosie died, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The months that followed were unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. True to his word, Richard Blackwood became a regular at Rosie's diner, but no longer as a silent observer. He talked, he listened, he asked questions that nobody had ever asked her before. He asked about her dreams, not her practical dreams like paying off debt, but her real dreams, the ones she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. She told him she had wanted to be a writer once, back when she was young and foolish, and believed that people from backgrounds like hers could do things like write books. She had notebooks hidden in her closet, filled with stories she had never shown anyone. Richard asked to read them. She refused at first, mortified by the idea of a billionaire reading her amateur scribbles. But he persisted, and eventually she relented. He read them in a single night, and the next morning he showed up at the diner with a contact, one of the top literary agents in New York. "I'm not saying your work is ready for publication. That's for professionals to decide. But I am saying it deserves to be read by someone who can help you make it better. Will you at least meet with her?" Maya met with her. The agent was tough, honest, and demanding. She told Maya that her writing was raw but powerful, that it needed years of refinement before it would be publishable. But she also said she would take Maya on as a client. The surgery happened 6 weeks after Richard first revealed himself. Daniel went in scared but brave and came out with a heart that finally worked the way it was supposed to. Maya was at his bedside when he woke, holding his hand, sobbing with relief. "Did it work, Mom?" "It worked, baby. You're going to be okay." "Who paid for it? You said we couldn't afford it."
Maya hesitated. She had never lied to her son, and she wasn't about to start now. "A friend," she said. "A very good friend." Daniel accepted this without question, because Maya had taught him that friends were the most valuable thing a person could have. Richard came to visit Daniel in the hospital. He brought books, engineering books, design books, books about Leonardo da Vinci and the Wright brothers and Elon Musk. Daniel's eyes went wide when he saw the stack. "These are from me? Your mother tells me you want to be an engineer. Well, engineers need to study. Consider this your starter library." Daniel looked at Richard with the uncomplicated trust of childhood. "Are you the friend who paid for my surgery?" Richard glanced at Maya, then back at Daniel. "I am." "Why?" "Because your mother is one of the best people I've ever met, and because people like her deserve to have their children grow up healthy and strong." Daniel considered this. "She is pretty great," he agreed. Richard laughed, a real laugh, warm and full, the kind Maya had never heard from him before. "Yes," he said, "she really is." As the months passed, Richard's health declined. There were good days and bad days, days when he showed up at the diner with energy and wit, and days when he could barely sit upright in the booth. But he kept coming. He met Leo and learned that the old man had been a firefighter for 40 years before his wife passed and his children stopped calling. He met Marcus, sober now, working part-time at a construction site and renting a room above the laundromat. He met Mrs. Patterson and her extra butter and her stories about the husband she had lost in Korea 60 years ago and still mourned every single day. He saw firsthand the community that Maya had built, not through money or power or influence, but through something much simpler, genuine care. And he understood, finally, what Eleanor had been trying to tell him. The world wasn't beyond saving. It was just looking for the right people to save it. 7 months after their first real conversation, Richard Blackwood's condition took a turn. The cancer had spread. There was nothing more the doctors could do. He called Maya and asked her to come to his mansion, not as a waitress, as a friend. She came, nervous and out of place among the marble floors and priceless artwork. But Richard wasn't interested in impressing her. He was interested in saying goodbye. "I've made some decisions," he told her, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at gardens he would never walk through again. "My lawyer will explain everything after I'm gone, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." "Richard, let me finish, please." Maya fell silent. "I'm leaving you the majority of my estate, not because you asked for it, you never would, not because you need it, although God knows you do, but because you're the only person I've met in 78 years who I trust to use it properly." Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Richard held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say, that you don't deserve it, that there are better people out there, that you're just a waitress from a roadside diner." He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity that belied his failing body. "But that's exactly the point, Maya. You are just a waitress from a roadside diner, and you have more integrity, more compassion, more genuine goodness in your little finger than my entire family has combined. My children see money as a scoreboard. You see it as a tool, a way to help people, a way to make the world a little less cruel." He reached out and took her hand. "Eleanor would have loved you. She would have loved everything about you. Your stubbornness, your pride, your refusal to accept anything you didn't earn. But I need you to accept this. Not for yourself, for Daniel, for Leo, for Marcus, for every person who walks through the door of Rosie's diner looking for something more than food." Maya was crying. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be rich." "Neither did I once. I was a kid from Delaware with $12 in my pocket. But I learned, and you'll learn too. The difference is you won't lose yourself in the process. You can't. It's not in your nature." He squeezed her hand. "There are conditions, of course. My lawyers will explain them. Specific amounts set aside for certain causes, structures to prevent the money from being wasted or stolen, but the core of it is simple. Use what I'm giving you to do what you've always done, just on a bigger scale." Maya nodded, unable to speak. "And one more thing," Richard's voice softened. "Buy the diner. Keep it exactly the way Rosie had it. Fix that ridiculous sign. And never, ever raise the price of the meatloaf." Maya laughed through her tears. "I won't, I promise." Richard smiled, and for a moment he looked younger, lighter, free of the weight he had carried for so long. "Good. Now go home to your son. Tell him his engineering books are just the beginning." Richard Blackwood died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, with a photograph of Eleanor on his nightstand and Maya's phone number saved as the last contact on his phone. His funeral was attended by thousands, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, all of them clamoring to pay respects to a man they had feared and envied and rarely loved. Maya didn't attend the public service. Instead, she sat in the diner, her diner now, though the paperwork wouldn't be final for months, and served meatloaf to Leo and Marcus and Mrs. Patterson. But she did watch the will reading on a live stream. The entire world did. And when the video played, Richard's final message, his declaration that Maya Johnson, a waitress from Exit 47, would inherit 92% of his fortune, the internet exploded. Gregory Blackwood filed a lawsuit within the hour. Priscilla gave an interview to CNN, calling Maya a con artist and gold digger. The tabloids had a field day, digging up every piece of Maya's past, the foster homes, the homelessness, the years of struggle. But they also found something else. They found the pictures on the diner's corkboard, the stories from Leo and Marcus and Mrs. Patterson, the testimony of everyone who had ever been touched by Maya's kindness. They found Daniel, now 12, speaking eloquently about his mother and what she had taught him about treating people with respect. They found the literary agent speaking about Maya's raw talent and determination. And they found Richard's own words, recorded in a series of video messages he had made in his final months, explaining exactly why he had made the choice he made. Maya Johnson, Richard said in one of those videos, his voice weak but steady, taught me something that all my money couldn't buy. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or assets or influence. It's measured in impact, in the lives you touch, in the people you lift up when the world tries to push them down. The lawsuits were thrown out, the tabloids moved on to new scandals, and Maya Johnson, waitress, single mother, accidental billionaire, began the work of transforming her life and the lives of everyone she could reach. The first thing she did, exactly as Richard had asked, was buy Rosie's roadside diner. The second thing she did was fix the sign. The third thing she did was establish a foundation, the Eleanor and Richard Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to helping people who had fallen through the cracks, homeless veterans, kids aging out of foster care, single parents drowning in medical debt, anyone who needed a helping hand and a place to exist. Daniel got his engineering education, first at MIT, then at Stanford, then as one of the youngest engineers ever hired at SpaceX. But he never forgot where he came from. Every summer, he returned to the diner to serve meatloaf and check on the regulars.
Marcus stayed sober. He got his contractor's license and started his own business, eventually employing dozens of people who, like him, needed a second chance. Leo passed away 2 years after Richard, but he did so surrounded by friends who loved him, in a warm bed at Maya's home, not alone in a cold apartment with a coffee cup that had gone cold. And Maya? Maya kept working at the diner, not because she had to. She never had to work another day in her life, but because she wanted to, because she understood, perhaps better than anyone, that some things were worth more than money. And on the wall of the diner, next to the photograph of Rosie, there now hung 2 new pictures. One was of Eleanor Blackwood, smiling in the garden she had loved. The other was of Richard, sitting in his usual booth, eating a plate of meatloaf, looking, for once in his life, completely at peace. Underneath both photos, in Maya's careful handwriting, was a simple inscription. For everyone who walks through these doors, you matter. You are seen. This is home. And the sign outside, finally fixed, finally whole, glowed warmly in the night. Rosie's Roadside Diner, open 24 hours. All are welcome. Below it, in smaller letters added by Maya herself, in memory of Richard and Eleanor Blackwood, who taught us that the best tip you can give is kindness. Cars continued to pull off Exit 47, their passengers seeking food, shelter, warmth, or simply a place to exist for a little while. And inside, Maya Johnson, billionaire, waitress, mother, dreamer, poured coffee and served meatloaf, and reminded every single person who walked through the door that they were worth believing in, just as someone had once believed in her, just as she would continue to believe in others for the rest of her life. Because that was the lesson, the real inheritance Richard Blackwood had left behind, not $14 billion, something far more valuable: hope. And maybe the greatest wealth any of us can leave behind isn't money, but the lives we change, the kindness we give, and the people who remember that we saw them when no one else did. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters. Because sometimes one small act of kindness can rewrite someone's entire destiny.